Employment has gone up across provinces, with the most significant job losses seen in Limpopo. Statistics South Africa's latest quarterly labour force survey has revealed that the unemployment rate for the first quarter of 2024 increased by 0.8 percentage points to 32.9%, and that was in the last 3 months of 2023. In the first quarter, 330,000 more people were unemployed, driven mainly by the community and social services, construction and finance industries. Graduate unemployment increased by 2.3 percentage points to 11.8% in the first quarter. And of course, that's in an environment where the youth remains the most vulnerable in the economy. Despite this decline, 22,000 jobs were created, mainly in trade, manufacturing, and in private household industries. The expanded unemployment rate has increased to 41.9%. And of course, as it goes, lots of numbers to unpack there, but let's take you to our reporter, Ntokozo Khumalo. She's standing by with the Statistician General Risenga Maluleke. Lots of numbers there, Ntokozo. You're going to try and give us a clearer picture of what it all means.
Good afternoon, Michelle. Well, what it means is that we are still struggling with an unemployment crisis in the country, ticked up, as you said, to 32.9% from 32.1% in the last 3 months of last year. And to give us that detail, I am joined by Risenga Maluleke, the Statistician General. Thank you for talking to us. I think the alarming figure for South African would be that unemployment ticked up across the board, all 9 provinces in the country. Talk us through what the drivers of unemployment were in the first 3 months of the year, but also where we did see some job gains.
Ntokozo, let us say that we at StatSA, and indeed as Statistician General, we are not having any emotional attachments in terms of saying the numbers are worrying or less worrying or what. What we do is we make numbers available. Now, let us look at what has happened from the previous quarter. In the last quarter of 2023, that is quarter 4 of 2023, the number of people employed was sitting at 16.7 million. We have seen an increase by 22,000 and it returned back at 16.7 million. The number of those unemployed was sitting at 7.9 million in the fourth quarter of 2023. As of the first quarter that we are reporting on, we have seen an increase by 330,000 people, returning the number of the people unemployed to 8.2 million. Now, the fact that the number of employed hasn't increased as much and the number of the unemployed has increased a lot more, we see that the unemployment rate has increased from 32.1% up by 0.8 of a percentage point to 32.9%. We can see that there are industries that have contributed to employment. We can see industries such as manufacturing. Manufacturing has increased about 99,000 jobs. Private households has increased by about 44,000 jobs. And we can see that there were jobs that came 109,000 jobs that came from other industries. But the fact that the number of the unemployed increased the most, largely due to community and social services, which lost 122,000 jobs. And we can say that we can see construction lost about 106,000 jobs. When that happens, then we see the unemployment rate increasing. Now, having said so, one of the things that has contributed the most is because the first quarter, that's when you have a lot of people coming out of schools. So you have people who have finished grade 12 who are now actively looking for employment. You also have graduates coming out of universities of technology who are looking for employment. That is why we see the graduate unemployment rate has also increased a bit by 2.6 percentage points, going up to about 12% of those unemployed.
And what does that signal then to the industries? As I said, in the third quarter of last year, we saw that unemployment or jobs created surpassing COVID-19 levels. So are those effects from the COVID-19 levels still being felt till today as we're starting to see then unemployment tick back up again? In the third quarter, it was the 8th consecutive decrease of unemployment, but the fourth quarter ticked back up.
Well, one of the things is that coming out of COVID, we will remember pre-COVID, we were sitting at 16.4 million people employed. And then we lost about 2.3 million jobs in the second quarter of 2020. And we have started recovering post-COVID. And as we started recovering, one of the things that we have seen is that for 2 years, for 8 consecutive quarters, we have seen an increase in the number of those that are employed. There was one quarter in the 2 years that we have seen 648,000 jobs being created. Having said so, the fourth quarter of 2023 had lost 22,000 jobs, and of course we have seen a gain of those 22,000 jobs again in the first quarter of 2023. But one thing I can say is that we are already going beyond COVID. So one is that we are actually surpassing COVID levels in terms of the number of people employed. But in terms of patterns, quarter to quarter, we see that what we used to see pre-COVID has changed. For example, we have seen some sectors that didn't generally lose employment, did lose employment in the fourth quarter. We would expect that the fourth quarter generally gains employment, especially in the trade area, but we see we have lost employment. And of course, we can see that come this quarter, first quarter of 2024, we see that trade has generated about 109,000 jobs, and of course, manufacturing and private households also generated. So we see that these patterns continue to be disrupted, but in terms of recovery, of course, we are making it further and further, and we are throwing COVID behind in terms of recovery and the number of people employed. Whereas that happens, we are seeing a lot more people, because our population is increasing. So we see a lot more people who are finishing school entering the labor force as well.
And then young people and women, specifically Black Africans, remaining the most vulnerable in the labor market. What was the data showing us for the first quarter when it comes to that demographic of the labor market?
Let us start with population groups in general. All the population groups are below the national average. So your white population group, your Indian Asian population group, and the colored population group are below the 32.9%. What we see is that only the Black African population group, that goes to about 36%. But when we unpack further in the Black African group, we see that the unemployment rate for Black African women is sitting at 39.2%, far higher than what we see in the national average of 32.1%. What it means is that Black African women are vulnerable to labor markets. When we come to young people, especially those aged 15 to 24 years, their unemployment rate is sitting at 59.6%, almost 60%. When we look at those aged 25 to 34 years, their unemployment rate is sitting at 40.7%. But when we look at young people aged 15 to 24 years, there are about 10.3 million young people in that age cohort, regardless of where they are. But of those, 3.6 million are not in employment, education, or training, and they return what we call a need rate of 35.5%.
And just looking finally at that trend of unemployment and looking back to the fourth quarter and the data we got out of the first quarter, how much of an impact do those seasonal workers that we see jump up in Q4? They would create, see job created, but in Q1, some of those jobs lost. Do we see, like, preparing for elections, the IEC workers, are they part of those workers? Can you give us insights on that?
One thing is that we see community and social services have lost 122,000 jobs, but it was largely in the area of education, whereas the IEC has increasing in terms of the number of people they are hiring in preparation for the elections. That hasn't been able to trump the number of jobs that have been lost in that area, especially in the education sector. But of course, as we are saying that, one thing we are seeing is that post-COVID, what we used to see as patterns, we are starting to deal with new patterns of employment season to season, quarter on quarter. And it's not ourselves alone. This matter happens all over the world.
Well, thank you so much for those insights. Of course, Michelle, that is South Africa's Statistician General Risenga Maluleke. And of course, the concern they are highlighting there is that there is a change in pattern in the labor market since COVID-19. So really, corporate industries and government stakeholders needing to dig into what those patterns are if the country really is to tackle unemployment. And if we look back, Michelle, to the new growth paths framework of 2010, the target set there was to have unemployment at 6% by 2030. But to achieve that, the country would need to see a decline in joblessness of 3.6% every single year. So sitting at 32.9% in the first quarter of this year, we can see that we are quite far from reaching that 6% unemployment target by 2030, Michelle. So a lot to still dig into the reports out of the stats office when it comes to those different demographics. And of course, you know, yesterday I spent the day with young people, part of those graduates who struggled to find employment, and they chose to rather go into business and rather struggle in business to put food on their table and really take care of their lives. So, you know, slightly depressing data once again when it comes to unemployment, especially considering that the first quarter is usually where we see a little bit of an uptick, even if it is suppressed job creation. And the IMF has already warned, Michelle, that the year does look bleak when it comes to us being able to create employment, expecting it to reach at least 33.6% by the end of this year and reaching closer to 40% by 2025, Michelle.
Yeah, incredibly worrying numbers, especially as unemployment ticks up, not just in parts of the country, but indeed in all 9 provinces. Ntokozo Khumalo in conversation there with the Statistician General. And of course, we'll continue unpacking those numbers for you throughout the day.